For the past 2 years or so, the Kubernetes community has been working on the Gateway API, and different Ingress implementations have started to implement the Gateway API as well. And Envoy Gateway is the upstream open source implementation of the Kubernetes Gateway API, leveraging Envoy as the data plane.
Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at KubeCon+CloudNativeCon in Paris. And today we have with us Zack Butcher, founding and principal engineer at Tetrate. Zack, it's great to have you on the show again.
Hey, great to be here. I'm glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And today we are going to talk about Envoy Gateway, the latest release 1.0. Before we go there, just let's talk about the Envoy ecosystem, and then we'll talk about the
Yeah. So Envoy, hopefully everybody here at CNCF at the KubeCon has maybe at least heard of Envoy at this point. It has been one of the earliest CNCF graduated projects, and it's very widely used. Of course, Lyft has originally developed it, and we've seen the community really explode over the past about 7 years that the project has been out. Today, some of the biggest contributors are Google, ourselves, Tetrate, Apple as well, and a whole smattering of other companies. And people have latched on because folks want that proxy that brings these powerful layer 7 capabilities that's highly dynamic, that's highly performant, and that brings good visibility and metering so that we can actually operate the darn thing. And so Envoy Gateway, at the same time, recently what's been happening in the Kubernetes community is, the Ingress API is pretty old. It was one of the original APIs in Kubernetes, and it's critical. You can't run a Kubernetes cluster without doing Ingress. And so the Kubernetes community, has been working to revise and rev that in the form of the Gateway API. And there's a lot of really promising aspects around the Gateway API that fix a lot of the pain that users have had with Ingress. In particular, it splits the roles between infrastructure providers and platform team and individual application developers that was kind of muddied with Ingress. And so for the past 2 years or so, the Kubernetes community has been working on the Gateway API, and different Ingress implementations have started to implement the Gateway API as well. And Envoy Gateway is the upstream open source. It's the GitHub repo is github.com/envoy-proxy/gateway. Implementation of the Kubernetes Gateway API, leveraging Envoy as the data plane.
How is Tetrate associated with Envoy Gateway?
We were one of the original organizations that helped kick off the project about 2 years ago. Matt Klein gave a great blog post kind of stating why the project was chartered. We wanted to make Envoy easier to use. We wanted to give a batteries included implementation that you didn't have to cobble together yourself. We wanted it to be ideally the reference implementation of the Kubernetes Gateway API. And he laid out a few more besides. And we, along with VMware, with Contour and Ambassador Labs and a few others, got together to kick off the Envoy Gateway project in the community, right? All these companies that were building around Envoy as a technology, but kind of parallel and in silos, right? We said, hey, look, let's pull this together. Let's do this once all together. And then we can go compete with each other on user experience and user value, and not, can you program Envoy better than I can program Envoy? Because quite frankly, that's not valuable for users.
Now let's talk about the recent release 1.0.
So we're super, super excited to have that 1.0 release. Again, the project is more than 2 years old, and it's been used in production a pretty good bit around the world, actually. There's some pretty heavy footprints in China using it heavily. We know some folks in South America as well, and in the US. We're seeing pretty fast adoption of it. And 1.0 is really kind of signaling to the larger community that, hey, this project is robust, it's ready for prime time, and it's ready to go into production. Envoy itself is, battle tested. It's been used by itself. It's been used in Istio and in other service meshes for years now. But Envoy Gateway, the control plane, is really what we've been hardening together with the community. And in 1.0, we're really saying, hey, we think this is ready. It's ready for prime time. It's ready for scale. So, what is some of the stuff that's there that we shipped? The other thing 1.0 means, real quick, is a commitment to backwards compatibility, right? So now you can actually start to use it, and have confidence that we're not going to break your configuration or anything like that. And we're really proud of what all has landed into the 1.0 release. There's a lot in there. There is things like incremental XDS, which is a better way of programming Envoy that's very efficient, that gives better performance trade-offs. There is support for OAuth 2, as well as rate limiting. Those are both capabilities you've been able to do with Envoy in the past, but Envoy Gateway makes it really, really simple and really easy to go use those functionality that are very common at Ingress, right? And then, of course, just all the goodness that is Envoy, per request load balancing, best-in-class metrics and telemetry, the outliers and circuit breaking and all the resiliency capabilities that it brings are all there. And the project has used the extension points in the Kubernetes Gateway API to let you turn all those knobs on Envoy to configure it how you want and to use all of those features that we all know are there.
Can you also share what does the roadmap for Envoy Gateway look like? Yeah. Of course, you cannot share a lot of things that are in the pipeline, but it's open source, but tell us.
Well, so unfortunately, the project has an open roadmap as well, so we talk about it quite a lot of what we want to do. So going into the next release, it has a 3-month release cadence, so we try and do 4 releases a year, and we'll be trying to stick to that from 1.0 on. The immediate things that are coming are better operational telemetry in the control plane itself. So there's already some there and enough that we think you can go to production with it, but we know that as people are hitting production, they're going to start to hit some problems. We can't account for everything. And so we're anticipating needing to go in and adding more debugging and diagnostics to be able to help with that. That's going to be a big piece that is coming. Going further on unblocking kind of some of the minute Envoy features, right? Envoy has a long, long list, and you need to think carefully about how it's exposed to users. And so we'll be adding more and more functionality there as well, around a bunch of different use cases, better support for different forms of encryption, some of the configuration around, Cipher suites, and do you do TLS 1.2 or TLS 1.3, all that kind of stuff that most people don't have to turn the knob on, but some people need to go and set those things. So that's a lot of what's going to be coming kind of in the next just immediate release. The other theme over the next few releases is really going to be about performance optimizations as well. So again, as we're going into larger and larger production environments, we anticipate that we're going to need to make improvements. We do scale testing and we do stress testing, but it's always different in the real world, right? And so we know that there will additionally be a long thread of performance improvements and optimizations that will be going into it as well.
And 1.0 release is always, very, emotional and, critical. So what does that release mean for customers, users?
It really means that the project is committed now to backwards compatibility, to support, to being there and available in the long haul, right? It is something that you can actually start to put production traffic on. And we were excited, I didn't mention earlier, but we had over 90 contributors to the project to get us to that 1.0 release. And so I want to highlight, that's phenomenal. That is so, and from a very diverse set of companies and from a very diverse set of places in the world as well. And that really speaks to kind of the groundswell of need and desire for this, as well as the excitement about it. It's exciting enough for folks that they're actually putting some engineering muscle behind it to help get it over the line. And so we were incredibly proud that for only a 2-year-old project, we were able to have over 90 contributors to get to this release.
Can you also talk about what kind of use cases you're seeing?
We're seeing quite a few. So obviously, not obviously, let me take that back, but what I see very frequently as kind of the starter use case is just what I call I have a low value ingress. Right, so a lot of Kubernetes providers have a default ingress implementation, and I do an ingress resource, and it routes my application, and it's good. But I'm not getting canaries. I'm not getting detailed metrics. I'm not getting fine-grained observability. I'm not getting all that goodness that Envoy brings. So the very first use case we see is literally just kind of a drop-in replacement. I'm going to migrate from Ingress to the Gateway API. And in doing that, I'm going to go ahead and just pick a better implementation for the data plane. That's the first and the most basic thing, and that's what we want out of the basic gateway API implementation. Where we're going further is starting to chip into what I call the 80% use case for API gateways. So API gateways do a whole lot, but for most traffic, there's really three things that I want my API gateway to do. I want it to authenticate my user, I want it to do some rate limiting, and I want it to do some load balancing. And that is exactly what Envoy Gateway can do today. We've added things like OAuth 2 support in upstream Envoy and make it really, really easy to configure via Envoy Gateway configuration so that you can go and do your end user authentication right there. We've added support for rate limiting in Envoy Gateway in a much simpler way than if you were going to roll your own with the Envoy rate limiting service in upstream Envoy. And we've massaged around the configuration and made it very easy to do what users need to accomplish. That's what we mean when we say Envoy Gateways of batteries included. We want to make those use cases easy. So those have been the two that we've been most focused on. Just the basic, do the gateway API for me, please. And then start to chip away at that, predominant API gateway use case that's real simple, that needs to be more performant, that people want to be more reliable, and they don't want to be locked into, their legacy API gateway stack while they're trying to be agile in Kubernetes. So those are the two that we see really resonate with folks today.
The beauty of these open source, projects is that, of course, the project that people can try, but not everybody has resources. That's where commercialization plays a very big role. So talk a bit of what plans you folks have for helping users consume Envoy Gateway if they don't have those resources.
First off, one of the other prong of batteries included is we have detailed guides for almost every single use case that you might think of. They're on the site, ready to go end to end, right? So, hey, I need to go do Canary deployments. I need to go do TLS. I need to go do H2V2 routing. I need to go, whatever it is, there's probably more than 30 or 40 guides that we have written there that cover a single use case that you want to accomplish end to end. And we show you how to do that in one web page there where you can go end to end and do that yourself. So that's one of the really valuable ways in the upstream side that we're facilitating people really getting going with it. And then, of course, from Tetrate side, we're a company here, so we'll have a product on top of the open source project that really just facilitates, you using it. We're going to be there and providing some support, providing best usage patterns and guidelines and things like that. Just like we do with Istio, a lot of that will be in open source, right? We firmly believe that that's where the magic needs to happen. And certainly, we'll continue to see as folks get more and more into API gateway use cases, a lot more of that's going to land in upstream as well. I think some pretty exciting stuff. Just a little teaser, like I have somebody right now working on things like API validation, right? Payload validation, and things like that, which have been long requested features. So we've got some really good stuff around users being able to use the project today on gateway.envoyproxy.io. That's the website for Envoy Gateway. Go check that out, and there's a ton of getting started stuff. And then, of course, check out docs.tetrate.io, and we additionally have an auxiliary set of guides to get going for some of the things that upstream doesn't cover and some of the cases that maybe are a little bit more advanced.
Zach, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about Envoy Gateway, the whole ecosystem, the problem you're solving, the evolution. Thanks for great insights. And as usual, I'd love to chat with you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Looking forward to next time.